Okay, you should be able to see my screen now of the CACFP system. Sorry. Yes, no, maybe so. Yes. Okay. Let me get squared away. Okay, so sometimes it is difficult for me to keep up with the chat. So if you have a question that I've not answered, please interrupt me and speak up, because I really am hoping that this is a training that you guys hopefully can walk along with your own application as I'm rambling on about the application, so that I've answered the questions you have in real time about how to fill out your application. Okay. We do have several different institution types in here. And so some things might be applicable to others, while some things may not be. So I'll try to point those out. If something I say doesn't make sense to you, please speak up, because it looks like we've got family daycare home sponsors, at-risk centers. We've got a good group in here this morning. First, I'm going to go over the stuff that everyone has, and I'm going to go over an application that would be for like a single-sided, just regular daycare. Because that one is, we have those mostly in this training, and most of those forms everyone has anyway. Okay, so the first thing you'll see when you log into your application, and one of the most important pages is the CMP business maintenance page. I am on a test hop is just our test entity. So a lot of it's going to be blank or doesn't make sense because we get in here and mess around with it. But this page here is where we house all your contact information. And it's probably one of the most important pages other than your application, where you have like your serving times and stuff. But we need to make sure that you guys are always keeping it as up to date as possible. Because if we're mailing stuff out, you'll see here we have a mailing address, and a lot of it's going to be grayed out. And it's stuff you can't change. So if you ever see something that's not right and you can't change it, reach out to the person who's assigned your application. And to be able to see that, and you might see some stuff on my page that is not on yours, and that's because I'm logged in as myself, which I have, I have access as an SCE user, so I have other extra buttons and fields that you may not have. And I don't think I even said my name. My name is Cassandra Riddell. I go by Cassie. I'm the director of CACFP. So if you get an email from me, it's going to come from Cassandra, but I go by Cassie. Most of you have probably reached out to me before. So anyway, down here is where you can go to find who your assigned office staff is. So it's going to be one of 3 people. Karen Davis, who she handles almost all of our multi-sided institutions. Jennifer Pryor, who deals with all of our at-risk. And then Lisa King, who is over all the independent daycares. So you're going to have one of these 3 people listed as your office staff. So that's going to be the best person to reach out to at any time, but especially during application renewal, because they're the ones going to be approving your application. So like I said before, we have a place for all kinds of addresses: your mailing address, your physical address, which sometimes that could be different, and then an address where records are kept, which could also be different. It's important that these addresses are accurate. If you do keep your records at a separate place other than your entity, or if you're like multi-sided and you have a central location, make sure you got that address right, because that's where we're going to show up to come do an administrative review, or where we're going to start anyway. So if your records aren't there, that is problematic. It could result in a significant overclaim, because we have to have access to your records at all times. And then we've made a recent change. A lot of you in here, we have some new ones, but I think we have a lot of renewing institutions. So this is a new change for you guys. You'll see, used to we just had a contact person, like I don't remember what the title was, but it was just one section for where you put a contact person. Well, we recently changed it to where now it's 2 sections where you can add important individuals' information. But this top one, you'll see I have access to go in here and type something in. You can see that I can click in the boxes, but when you're looking at your business maintenance page, it's going to be grayed out. And that's important for a lot of reasons, but mostly because if your owner or your main director or your superintendent, depending on the type of institution you are, if that person changes, we need to be notified first. And that was a field before where you could just change it. And what was happening was, we have this owner or executive director listed and we think that's who it is. And then we go out there and find now it's someone different, or anyway, we just have to get that information and enter it and be knowledgeable of it so we can make sure our consultants know who they're going out and looking for when it's time for an administrative review. It's also important because if your center at any point ever changes ownership, you have to reapply for the program. You can't just transfer like if you wanted, we've had situations where like a parent transferred ownership to their child or something. That's okay, but that person has to reapply completely. So we're kind of trying to curb that and make sure we are keeping up with when those changes happen. But then this bottom section down here, the authorized representative, you guys can maintain that yourself. And what we were finding during reviews is that we're not always capturing all the responsible people that we need to know about. So like your cook, or like your assistant director, or things like that. As you know, on the application for participation, if you're single-sided, you just have that one spot to list your director, but you might have an assistant director, or you might have someone else that has some type of, that would be considered an authorized representative. So we encourage you to put in as many people in here as you want, so that you can make sure we know who to reach out to for certain things. So you don't necessarily have to put all that information, but it's there if you want to put their email or if they have other phone numbers. So you can just enter as many people here as you want. I'm going to put, I'm just showing you an example. So see, you can just keep adding them all day long. And I really encourage you to do it because that's going to help us be able to make sure we know who's all responsible individuals at your institution. And like I said, you have the ability to maintain that section. Another important part of this page that you have control over is the institution's fiscal year. Whatever dates are listed here, if it's not your actual fiscal year, we don't want you to list our year. We want you to list your fiscal year. And our fiscal year in CACFP is October to September. And I think when you guys first apply, I need to find out instead of just saying I think, but I'm pretty certain when you apply, it defaults maybe to October to September, and then you have to change it to something else if it's different. But many of you are not going to operate on October to September. A lot of our daycares are going to be January to December. Our schools operate on a July to June. So make sure this is correct. And the reason this is important is because that's when you have to report your financial fiscal year information to us, and we'll talk about that later. It auto-populates these dates from here. So make sure that's correct. And then you'll also see we have our training records that display on the bottom of your business maintenance page as well. Your institution hours of operation, make sure those are current, because we really should make sure that we know when you're open so that we have the ability to come out and conduct an administrative review during those hours. Okay, so some of you might see the site maintenance. We're not going to go over that quite yet, and you guys aren't going to have these other buttons. Most of you are just going to have this applications button. If you're multi-sided, you're going to have site maintenance, and we'll come back to that and go over this multi-sided at the end, because this doesn't apply to most in the training right now. So everyone has the applications button. When you click in it, if you're renewing, you'll see all your past applications. If you haven't inserted your 2022 application yet, go ahead and just put the date here and click add renewal. And it will populate up here. I've already done that, so I don't need to click it. If you're brand new and you go to that page, you might not have anything and some red writing that says you don't have any applications yet, and you'll do that same process in 2022 will populate. And that should take you to your checklist. The very first form on this checklist is applicable to everyone in the program. And last year it was called the application questionnaire, and we've changed it to the viability, capability, and accountability questionnaire. If you have come on the program in the last 18 months or so, or if you've unfortunately been seriously deficient in the same amount of time, you've experienced the VCA checklist that you had to complete to be approved or to renew your application. We are slowly incorporating that document that's required into our renewal application, because it's not just a punishment for SD people and making it hard for new ones to come on. It's something we should be capturing every year, and we've just sort of been missing the boat in making sure that we're asking the right questions each year when you renew your application. So last year it was a page that just had these 5 questions. And every year these questions rolled forward, answered like they were the year before. And so we have turned that off. So it should be blank when you go in there and look at these first 5 questions. The problem with that is because sometimes it could change, and we got to make sure that you're updating it when things do change. And when it was auto-populating, we were finding that wasn't happening. So one of them really that we noticed is a lot of them, like if you're brand new, you might have said no on number two. No, I've never participated because you're brand new. Well, that was rolling forward. We had people renewing 5, 6, 7 years later, and it still said no. So if you're renewing your application, it should be yes. So just be aware of that. But we've now added a whole bunch more questions on this form. Okay. One error we are having with this page, and we need to do some work on it so that it's better tells you a message when you get an error, is if you type too many characters in these boxes. Right now it will hold up to 750 characters. So we don't need a novel, but we need a detailed explanation. And I think 750 characters is plenty enough for you guys to be able to answer in enough detail your processes. And I'll go through the questions here in a minute. Another issue we're getting with this form is when you spend all your time going down here and you go to submit it way down here, it's not given the message that if you check on any of these that you check no, you have to put some type of explanation or something. So make sure if no, you're putting, NA or don't participate or whatever, because it's not giving a message that that's what's missing. So for the questions that we've added, I'm not going to go in great detail over all of them. I'll just quickly go over them. But if you have questions, please speak up. But these are questions about your procedures and the way you operate that if you're in this training class right now, you should be able to answer. And it's going to be different for every institution because you all have different policies and procedures. They should be similar because we have requirements of how you're supposed to maintain records and all that. So the first one is please explain your procedures that ensures integrity and accountability of all Cacfp related expenses by ensuring that they're used on allowable costs, yada, yada, yada. So we provide everything you guys need to be able to do that with our food purchasing forms, our expenditure worksheets, and whatnot. So if you use nothing more than the materials we give you, then that you're doing what you need to do. You just need to explain that here and how you're recording those purchases and what your process is for that, how you're documenting. If you do something other than what we have provided, as always, if you're using different forms, it has to be approved by your consultant first, just because anything other than what we create has to be as good as or better than, right? So that's regulatory that we have to approve it just to make sure it's capturing everything it's supposed to. Just tell us how you're doing that. And then this one right here, please describe your current accounting method. If you don't know a specific name of what it's called, just tell us how you track it. Most of you are going to be using accrual because you just basically are paying as the expense happens, you pay for it. And it is regulatory that you have to record expenses in the month in which they occurred. So you might use CACFP funds to pay for a portion of your OG&E bill, right? But you pay this month's, September's bill is not going to be paid till October, but you're still going to record it in September. So explain that and explain how you're recording your expenses. You're recording them in the month in which they incurred, and you pay bills as they occur. That is simple enough answer. Okay, describe how your accounting method will clearly record when a cost incurred, where it occurred, and what the cost was for. Describe the accounting software you may use. So that would be QuickBooks, ProCare, for example. Even Minute Menu has some accounting options in it. If you just use an Excel spreadsheet, put Microsoft Excel. It's so that our consultants have an idea of what to look for when they're coming out for a review. If you don't use any software, that's fine. If you just use our forms, just put in A, because that's fine too. Then we need to know the people who are responsible for certain things. So who develops the budget, and who's also responsible for reviewing it and comparing it to your actual budget, your approved budget, to make sure that they're all in a line. Generally, that's just going to be your director or owner person. But if it's more than one person, list them. Then we want to know all the site personnel who have any CACFP responsibilities. If you have multiple sites, we need to know who those people are. And that's just we're trying to make sure we're capturing all the responsible people that have anything to do with CACFP, because as you know, they all have to be trained. They don't necessarily have to attend our required training. You can take our materials and train them, but you have to make sure they're all trained. These 12, 13 and 14, we just want to know, list the people who are responsible for doing these duties: hiring personnel, training individuals on CACFP. Oh no, this one says when do new personnel receive training for CACFP. This is an important one because you guys might have very specific timelines of when you do training for your new hires. And I've gotten lots of answers on these VCA, like within 90 days or whatever. The right answer to this one is they're going to receive CACFP training before they have any CACFP duties. That's regulatory. You can't let them serve a meal if they don't know what a serving size is. Who's responsible for doing the training? Please describe your procedures for ensuring that all meals meet meal patterns. Okay, so cycle menus aren't required, but it is required that you meet the minimum meal patterns. When and how are you reviewing your menus to make sure that happens? Describe your institution's procedures for collecting the family size of income applications and your CACFP enrollment annually for each participant. Now, this question might not apply to everyone. Not everyone has to do income applications. If you're a Head Start or an at-risk, that part would be not applicable, and just explain that. But for most of our institutions are just regular daycare centers, you all have to renew that information every year. So do you do it in July, August timeframe when we release the new application? That's generally when it comes out. Do you just wait to do it in October because that's when the new fiscal year starts? What is your process for collecting that new annual information? Describe your procedures for maintaining how you maintain daily records. This has to be done. So we just need to know how you're ensuring that your records are up to date every day. How do you ensure your claims are submitted on time? If you've been on the program longer than 10, maybe 12 years, way back in the day, we used to only pay claims once a month. And if you've been on long enough, you remember that. And the due date was the 10th day of the month. And if you didn't get it in by the 10th, then you were just out of luck and you had to wait till next month because claims were only paid once a month. Well, once everything went electronic, it became easier for us to pay weekly. So we pay every week except for the last full week of the month, because that week is reserved for when we have to do federal reports. Our due date for claims is still the 10th day of the month. Now, you're not necessarily penalized if it's not due by then, but it certainly helps us do what we need to do and make sure our federal reports are as accurate as possible if you're turning them in a timely manner. And you may not know, but please be aware that if claims are not submitted by the 60th day, then they are late and you're not eligible for payment unless you complete a one-time exception. And you can only apply for one of those once every 36 months. Okay, these next ones talk about records. You have to keep them for 3 past years and the current. So how are you keeping them? Where are you keeping them? Who has access to them? We have had instances where, they're locked up in a secure place, and that's great because there's some sensitive information, especially if you have to collect income applications. You've got social security numbers, income information. We want them to be secure, but somebody has to have access to them. So unfortunately, we've even terminated somebody because the person who had the only key to the file cabinet where everything was never showed up. So there was no proof that there were even records for all these meals that have been reimbursed for. So make sure that somebody on site always has access to those records. These last 2 questions kind of are one and the same. They might be the same answer. They probably for everyone will be. In the event your institution must repay a debt owed to us, what funds will you use? And so that's going to be more times than not because of administrative review. At some point, everybody that's in here right now is going to have a review where something's happened, you've made some mistakes, and you got to pay some money back. Not uncommon, not a big deal. We are able to take that amount out of your claim, out of future reimbursements, but that's not the right answer here because really it's regulatory that you can't use CACFP funds to pay for any bad debt, really. So it's basically implied that when we reduce your reimbursement, that you have some supplemental income somewhere else that is subsidizing that less amount, right? So DHS subsidy, personal funds, credit cards, lines of credit. We don't by any means want you guys to have to go and charge our credit card, but you have to show you have some kind of additional funding to support repayment of any debt owed. And then 22, like I said, is probably going to be the same answer as 21, but it is regulatory that you have to have enough funds to operate this program without our funds. So that's one of the bases for even being approved on this program. And that's been pretty hard for some of our new ones to understand. If I didn't need the funds, why would I be on the program? And we're looking at it all wrong. You are able to participate in this program because you're already providing these meals. The addition of the reimbursement you receive is intended to increase the quality of the meals you're already providing. So we need to know what other funding you have that will allow you to operate this program without our funds. And we have to be able, eventually, what's going to happen is we're going to start looking at that a little more during a review to make sure that you are financially viable. Because like I said, it is regulatory. It's alarming to us when, and it happens. It hadn't happened in a while. I shouldn't have said that, knock on wood, because you never know what can happen. Our system can fail us. COVID has really messed some things up. Things completely out of our control can cause us to not pay on what we call schedule. And you would not believe our phones blow up. And the calls we get because people are angry because we haven't paid. There was earlier this year, I think in January, we went 2 or 3 weeks without paying and folks were really upset, but it's concerning to us. And it's sort of a red flag when we have people who are that in need of these funds to be able to operate. And that's not to say we get the last 18 months, 2 years has been really tough, but you still have to be able to operate this program without our funds. So we need to know what funds you're using to do that. And then this last one here, it's not really a question. It's just a little attestation statement that you have to check before you can submit it. And it's just stating that you understand that your application has to be submitted by October 31st. We've had some confusion in the past when the due date was, and then what, if you didn't submit it by this date, what month are you eligible for? And so basically, we're just, for everyone, even brand new ones, we can't backdate applications prior to the month and when you submitted the application. So if come November 1st, you haven't submitted, you've lost your eligibility for October. Any questions on this form? I know that's an awful lot. If you still have concerns or questions on how to answer these.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yesterday, I was working on the application and I had to stop and I lost everything that was in it. Is there any way to save it so you can go back and finish it at a later time?
I know this is a really sorry response, but no. We need to add a save button. And like I said, that's unfortunately the caveat with making changes. So what I would recommend, that page is not going to save until you have something in every box. So if you're typing away and you need to come back later, like just put a character in every one of those boxes and just go ahead and submit it, knowing you got to come back to it later. So at least, you know, if you only get the first few answered, just go put even just a period or one character and then submit, and it'll save it then.
So we don't need, so you will know then that we're still working on it. So
we don't look at any of your application until you submit the entire checklist.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't even have an alert that would tell us until you're completely done. So that's one little sheet that at least you can come back to it later. And like I said, I know that's a sorry response, but we do need to get a save button. We're trying to get save buttons added to every page. You would think that was an easy task, but it's really not, because when there's so many questions on a page, that save button has to talk to every single box. So it's taken some work. Any other questions? Okay. What I was going to say is I do have orientation / VCA class that I do on the same day as I do this training. It's in the afternoon. So if you have questions about any of those questions we've added that I haven't already answered, you're welcome to come to that. It's at 1 o'clock. Okay, so the next page that everyone has is the funds received. Disregard that error. I don't know why I get it on this test page, but.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
You were saying that about the fiscal year.
Yeah.
And I've always done mine just according to the way you all have, but our fiscal year runs January to December. So how's that going to affect if I change it from October to September to January to December? How is that?
It's really not, it might change. As far as we're concerned, it's not going to change a whole lot, because now we're going to be capturing the right information, and it's probably not going to change so much what you report back to us. It might, but that's what we've kind of figured out. We've noticed a lot of our, especially just our regular independent daycares, they all operate January to December, and a lot of them are still having October to September here. And so when we're asking you to report your financial information to us, it's so that we know what you made in the prior fiscal year. And we have to have the right months. And so it might change what you're reporting here on this page, but I don't really think it's going to affect how you're budgeting, you're doing your budget or anything else, because I mean, really every 12 months, no matter what 12 months it is, it kind of all comes out in the wash anyway. You know what I mean? Okay. So that's why I said earlier, it's really important to make sure we have the right months here, because there is a requirement. It's a federal requirement, I think for all federal programs across the board, that if you receive more than $750,000 a year in federal funds, you have to have an annual audit. And when we talk about an audit, it's not what we do. It's some other outside audit, an organizational audit, independent financial audit, what have you. And so that's where we kind of realized we weren't really capturing the right information when we were just telling people, oh, just tell us October to September because that's our fiscal year. No, because if your fiscal year is January to December, the requirement is that if you made over $750,000 in federal funds, that within 9 months after the end of that fiscal year, you have to have an audit. And like I said, that's an outside audit, organizational audit, financial audit, basically. We really panicked some people. It was a small group of people last year when we realized we weren't really doing this like regulations stated. We always required our nonprofit folks to do an audit because that's just regulatory. They have to have one anyways. But we had a small group of centers who did go over this $750,000 threshold, and we weren't requiring them to do an audit because if you read the regulation, it's kind of like any other regulation. It's just, there wasn't a lot of, it was pretty vague. And once we dug into it, we realized it wasn't just nonprofits that have to go by this, it's every institution. So as a business, even if we have some that are multi-sided and we have owners that have 3 or 4 centers, but they're all independent agreement numbers, you're still one entity, and we need to know what your business made in federal funds for your whole business, right? And so if it goes over that 750, then you have to have an audit. And like I said, we had a small group where we realized that for-profit institutions, we didn't have them. And so all of a sudden we sent an email out and we're like, hey, we need your audit. And they're like, we have no idea what you're talking about, because we never really enforced it for our for-profits. So what we're doing now, because those audits can be costly, not can be, they are costly. And if you can use our funds to pay for it, but some of them were having a really hard time even getting an accountant or an agency to want to be able to help them get this audit. So I say all that to say this: when you fill out this form, you're going to make sure you have the right dates of your fiscal year, and you're going to report the amount of federal or CACFP funds you received for your fiscal year. And then you're going to report your federal funds that you received for your fiscal year. If those two things add up to be $750,000 or more, you have to have an audit, regardless of what type of institution you are. If this is something new to you and you don't know what to do, don't panic. We have the funds, and we've arranged with an outside company to conduct those for you at our cost. This doesn't apply to a lot of our, just like I said, independent centers. But we do have an edit in this page that if these two boxes add up to be 750,000 or more, it will not let you save if you don't put a date here. So if you're one of those, it adds up to be 750 and you haven't done an audit because now we're springing this requirement on you, just put the current date, just put a date in there. I hate to tell you to just make something up, but if you hadn't had an audit, this form's not going to save without it in there. But reach out to us and let us know, because what's going to happen is, regardless of what you put here, if it goes over that 750, after applications are approved every year, usually November, December, we pull some data, and anyone who goes over that amount, I send that information to Becky Gray, and she's the one who's responsible for collecting those audits. So say you are January to December and you add up to be over 750. The requirement is that you have to have an audit within 9 months after the end of your fiscal year. So technically, anyone that operates on January to December who makes over the $750,000 should have already had that audit. So if you're falling into that category where you need to have one and you haven't because we've not really enforced this requirement, don't panic. You're welcome to reach out to me after the training. But it's just a very few of you that it even applies to. If these numbers don't add up to be $750,000 and you put a date here, it's going to delete it, because a lot of people think when we're asking for the date of audit, we're referring to our administrative review when we come out, and that's not what we're talking about. So we don't need a date if you don't go over that threshold. And something I like to point out, we try to put a little bit of more definition here on what federal funds are. So it's any of your title money, DHS subsidy, if you're an adult daycare home, adult daycare center, you do receive federal funds. Although it is Medicaid and it's that is state funds, there's an amount of money that's federally that's matched. So you do receive federal funds. So that Title 19 does have federal funds in it. Tribal funding, if you're a school, you receive tons of other funding. Make sure you put all your federal funding here. Any questions? That was probably more information than most of you needed, but I wanted to make sure we understood why the fiscal year was important and why it needed to be reflective of yours. Okay.
Quick question. Okay, when you're running from January to December and we have to do this application and stuff in October, it's not going to reflect the October, November, and December incomes or anything.
Well, you're going to be reporting the prior year. So if you operate January to December, you're going to report January to December of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. If you operate July to June, it's going to be last year's and what this last June would be the end.
Okay.
Same thing for October to September. You're going to report the last completed fiscal year.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The next form is the meal policy statement. Nothing has changed about this. You just have to agree to it. Read it and then agree to it. Civil rights, we haven't made any changes on this. This is the civil rights statement, non-discrimination statement, and then you have to go to the next page and fill this out. It does roll forward with the information from last year because generally it might not change. But you do have to check this box every year and say that you have had the training. So civil rights training is required every year. We do have a live one on October 1st. And then we have the self-paced one. So everyone has to have civil rights training. Everyone doesn't necessarily have to attend individually. If you want to register for the self-paced, or as with any of our trainings, if you have a group of people with you and you're all listening to a training, do an agenda or a sign-in sheet or something as proof that all those people were sitting there listening to the civil rights training and you did it all together. And that has to be maintained with your records, because we have to look at that during a review to make sure you've all had your civil rights training. Number 6 and 7, we added maybe 2 years ago, just trying to capture if there's any linguistic needs, if you have individuals that speak any other languages that you might need help with or need materials for those languages. If you're a school, is it federal funds or just, so let me go back. I'll go back to that in a second. Any questions on this form? It's pretty cut and dry. On the funds received form, you report total federal CACFP funds here, and then all your other funding would go down here. So I didn't mention that. So like your NSLP, if you're doing SSO, all those payments, breakfast, these are all going to be dumped down here. If you did summer food program, everything else goes down here. And just CACFP goes up here. And so it would be all your other federal funding. Title I, title, I don't know, all title money y'all get a lot. Public release, this form has not changed. If you are a renewing institution, Head Start money, yes, that's considered federal if you're federally funded, because some Head Starts are state funded. So if you are federally funded, that would go in your federal fund box too. Nothing's changed about this, and if everyone in here should be renewing, so you should have this box here. You do not have to do an individual public release every year on CACFP. When you first come on, you have to print this public release, and then we have to see proof of where you really sent it. But when you renew, you can opt into the statewide release. And every year we generate a big mass list of these people that opt into it. We send it to our communications people, and it gets sent to announce who all we have in our programs. So if you choose to do the public release and send it wherever you can. So if monies are not used to pay for food, just regardless of what you use federal funds, let's go back here. On this form, it does not matter what you use that money for. If you received it, you have to report it. Okay. So public release, that one's pretty easy. You don't have to do it. Just click the area, whatever it was called, the wide release, statewide release, and that's it. State agency institution agreement. This one rolls forward, approved, submitted and approved every year because it's a permanent agreement, right? But I would highly recommend that you print it and read it, because everything you're agreeing to is in this really large document, right? And every year we might make, we didn't make any changes this year. The only changes we made, it went from, our grains went from servings to ounce equivalents. We updated that verbiage, but we didn't really have any new policies. But I still recommend every year you print this, because you'd be surprised during a review. We get so many times we'll write someone up for something and be like, well, I want to know where it says that. Where does that say that in writing? And 100% of the time it's going to be in this document. So make sure that, although you don't have to submit it every year and agree to it, You are permanently agreeing to it on the while you operate the program. Owner board members page. We changed this one a couple of years back. So if you just have an owner and you're just a for-profit entity and you have an owner or more than one owner, all you're going to do is this top section, right? And if you have more than one owner, make sure you list them. We added where you could put a co-owner because many times we have institutions that have more than one owner, and that's fine. We just need to make sure we have all the right people. All this information is required too. It's regulatory that we require that up on the front end of things before we can approve you, because we have to check the national disqualified list for everyone that applies and everyone that has anything to do with this program to make sure you've never been put off the program and you're disqualified, basically. So really the only way to identify the right people is to have the birth date. So it is required. If you don't have a board, you don't have to do anything more on this page. But if you are a nonprofit, or if you are an incorporated entity, a true incorporated entity, you have to have a board. And we will be kind of honing in on this year because we've had some applications where the names say Inc. on the end. And I don't know if that's because they were Inc. at one time, or if our system won't allow to have the same name in there twice. So maybe they just put Inc. on it so it would take it when they applied. I don't know. So we're really going to make sure that if you have Inc. on your name, that you really are an incorporated entity and that you have a board. So you have to list your entire board members, the entire board. Every board member has to be here. This applies to schools too. So you have to make sure your board's here. But something new we did add was the date of the last board meeting. You have to be having regular board meetings, and we've really not been making sure that's happening too. So you got to put the date of the last meeting here, and then you're going to have to send a copy of the minutes from that last meeting. And sometimes I've had the question, sometimes you don't sign off on the minutes from one meeting into the next meeting. That's fine. If you haven't had it signed off on yet, just put the date of the last meeting that the minutes were signed off on and submit that. We just need proof that you have a governing board and that they really meet and there's some oversight there for your entity. And when you're done with that, you submit it. Disclosure of lobbying activities. I don't know a single institution right now that even completes this form because it's not really happening. But as you all know, you still have to go down here and put prepared by. You wouldn't fill out anything else on here unless there is some true lobbying activities going on with your institution. You just have to put the prepared and then submit. Every board member it's always been required that they were on the application. So I've had that question more than once in training, and I don't know if it was a matter of it just wasn't put on there. We're just assuming what the information you guys put on there is correct until we go out in a review and find it's not. And that's sort of what we're finding, especially when we're requiring that on the VCA now too. You have to list them all. So it's always been required that you have to list every board member. And it's important to know that your board changes. So when your board changes, so does this form. Okay. Application for participation. Everyone is going to have some form of this. Your board meeting minutes, you'll need to send to the person. We took away your access to upload documents last year, I think, because it just kind of got, it's just easier for us to maintain. So send it to the person assigned to your application. You're with the school, so it would go to Jennifer Pryor. Okay, so everyone's going to have some sort of this. If you're independent, it's going to look like this. If you're multi-sited, you're going to have one of these forms for every site you have. Or if you're a family daycare home, you have one for your providers, but it's a little bit different and we can switch to it later. But a good portion of it is the same on everyone. The difference with multi-sited is you don't type in this information right here, and we'll go back to that when we look at site maintenance. But if you're multi-sited and this is wrong, you can't change it. So you got to go back to your site maintenance and you got to reach out to the person in charge of your application to get it updated. For an independent institution, you can see here, you can type it in yourself. So we want to know the name of the director or the site representative, because sometimes we have schools or nonprofits, a lot of this verbiage on these forms refer back to daycares, but we have lots of types of different institutions. So what we're after here in this box is who's the responsible person we're looking for when we come to this site, who knows about the program and who do we need to talk to, okay? For a daycare, it's going to be a director, but for a school, it might be the food service director or the cafeteria manager or what have you. If you are independent, single-sided, this is going to be grayed out. If you are multi-sided, you're going to need to say yes or no. And because we need to know if your sites are affiliated with your sponsor or not. If your sites are unaffiliated, I've already sent that email out to multi-sided institutions that are unaffiliated. Basically, affiliated means that site is part of your legal entity. You own or have some type of other legal obligation with that entity. So like Head Starts, they're affiliated with all their sites. They may not own the buildings they operate in, but they're affiliated through the Head Start grantee. Mostly it's just our nonprofits that operate the at-risk, to be honest, that have unaffiliated sites. Like, hey, I want to go serve some meals and do this enrichment program at the park down here. You can do that, but you don't own the park. You got to have a side agreement with the Parks and Recreation of Oklahoma City or what have you to be able to use that site. So we've already reached out to the individuals that are unaffiliated. So the vast majority of our institutions for multi-sided, it is going to be affiliated. And like I said, for independent ones, it's just grayed out because it's a moot point. In D, we need to know if you're licensed or not. So we're really referring to tribal licenses, military license, DHS childcare license, adult daycare license through health department. If you do not have a license, which not everybody on the CACFP does, don't put yes. That's important because if you don't have a license, then you don't have a capacity and all that. So if you are operating and you don't have a license, you have to have approval from DHS that you're truly exempt. And we started that last year, I think, where we started making you guys have that. Schools are exempt from this because you're a public institution that already works with school-age children anyhow. So you don't have to have that exemption, but I'm not sure if we have any this applies to. So I'm not going to go into great detail, but just know that if you don't have a license and you're not a school, you have to reach out to DHS and explain to them, I'm this type of program, this is how I operate, am I exempt from the law to have a childcare license? Because in Oklahoma, and it might be a national requirement, I don't know, I may have made that up just now, but if you keep kids more than 15 hours in a week, it's law that you have to have a license. There's lots of other things that can exempt you from the law, though. Does your center participate in any other state? Really, for an independent, we should have this grayed out too. This would only really apply to our multi-sided. We don't have that many multi-state operating institutions. We have some. If you need to specify the type of institution you are, a lot of you are going to be none of the above. I don't know that we have any private schools. We've quite a few public schools and tribes. G, a lot of this is rolling forward, filled out for you, but you're going to make sure it's correct. If you're a school or a tribe, you're going to be public, private nonprofit. As you know, you have to have a 501c3 unless you're faith-based, and that's not required. And then these right here, proprietary Title 20 or proprietary free and reduced. The reason this is important is because you have to be at least 25% Title 20. If your enrollment has to be at least 25% of them have to be on the DHS subsidy, or 25% of them have to be categorized as free and reduced in order for you to be eligible to participate every month. That's why you have to report that participation data every month for those of you that have to report that. That doesn't apply to at-risk and some other types. Family daycare homes, that doesn't apply to you either. So it's important we have the right one selected here because then that determines what you have to report on your claim. Most of our institutions are just regular single-sided daycares or proprietary Title 20. H is the type of facility you operate. pretty cut and dry. This is one we get confused about a lot. Outside school hours care does not mean you just care for children outside of school hours. It's a very specific type of care center that we don't have a lot of in Oklahoma. We had more because of COVID last year because school was out or virtual. And so we had places that were caring for children that normally didn't outside of school hours. A good example of this would be like a school that operates 4 days a week, and on the 5th day they provide childcare. They wouldn't necessarily have a license because it's not more than 15 days or 15 hours a week. That would be an example. So most of our childcare centers are just regular childcare center. Or you're a Head Start, then we have our adult daycare. At-risk program, this box is kind of tricky. Once you have submitted this application the first initial time, you can't make any changes to this. We have to maintain it. And it's important because when you're operating the at-risk in a normal non-COVID year, you have to be eligible. You have to be in an area that's eligible, that's at least 50% free and reduced. And so once that determination's been made of what area you're located in, that determination lasts for 5 years. And this is what controls your access to claims. And so it's the reason why we have it locked out of. So once that expires, we have to update it. So just take a glance at this if you're at risk, make sure it's correct and up to date. And if it's getting close to expiring, you might want to reach out to Jennifer Pryor because she's the one that manages those. Then nobody can click on emergency shelter. We have that grayed out because it accidentally gets checked by individuals that shouldn't check it. We only have one emergency shelter in the whole state that's on. So it's not really applicable to 99% of our population that's doing this form. I is the age range of your enrolled participant, and then license capacity. So like I said before, if you don't have a license, you shouldn't be putting a license capacity. So when you click no on this, it defaults to 0 because you don't have a capacity. But if you are licensed, you want to make sure you put what your correct license is here. Hours of operation, everything's in military time. If you don't know how to do that, you can click that and it'll tell you. But make sure we know what the site's hours of operation are. Dates of operation, this is one that kind of gets messed up. Mostly on our schools put the wrong information here because they run on a different fiscal year on NSLP than they do in this program, and it gets confusing. But make sure everyone that's renewing their application, your dates of operation, your dates of eligibility would be October 1 of the current year to September 30th of the following year, because that's our program year. So if you're a school, don't put like August to May, because May is not the end of this fiscal year. You still come back after the summer and are operating through August and September of the same application. Does that make sense? So really everyone that's renewing should just put 10/1 of the current year to 9/30 of the next year. Then the number of days per week and the weeks per year. Schools have a very specific number of weeks per year, but everybody else would just be 52. Do you serve meals in shifts? If yes, please explain. You can serve 2 shifts of every meal, but you have to have a good reason why. And then F, you don't see this. All you see is the statement here. So if you're renewing, we check all the months for you, unless you're at risk. At-risk are not eligible to participate in June and July because at-risk can only operate during the month in which school is operating. So any at-risk in here, you need to be mindful of the day school begins is when you can start your at-risk program, and the day school ends is when you have to end it. Section 3A is about your meal service status. So this is kind of silly. You have to say yes on this one. You have to maintain your records on site. Can't say no. Number 2, how do you take the meal counts? We want to know what's your process for counting the meals you're claiming. If you're doing it based on attendance, that's unacceptable. If you're doing it any other way, then when the meals are served, you're counting the meals that include all the items to be a reimbursable meal. There's no other acceptable way. So each of you might serve a different way. You might have a cafeteria and they come through the line and you count them that way. Or you might take the meals to the classroom and the teachers dish it up or what have you. We just need to know how your counts are taken. This is the section where you add your meal times. There are a lot of edits in place that make sure that it is in line with like your hours of operation. So like I'm going to add a lunch from 11 to 12 and I'm going to say 100. So now it's saying I'm exceeding my license capacity. So because your number of meals is how many you're going to serve for that shift. So now it's not doing it because I don't have hours of operation. So I'm going to add my hours of operation. All right, so we got it inserted. Did you guys see that message that I kept clicking through? This is a new requirement that we've added this year. And when you're doing your unapproved application, your renewal right now, you can disregard this message, okay? But if after your application is approved and you need to come back and update a meal time, either change it, add one, or delete one, you have to submit a paper form to us. And I know that seems like we're going backwards. Now we're going back to paper, but the reason being is we had an audit finding that showed us a flaw in our system. So for example, say you have 2 lunches, right? And you can claim up to your maximum capacity for both of those lunches at each shift, right? And for 3 or 4 months of the year, you claim 2 shifts, maximum capacity, and we were paying you. And then you decided you only need 1 shift now. So now your maximum is half the amount of what you could claim before. So now it looks like we've been paying you more than you should have ever been allowed because you deleted that lunch, that second lunch, and it's like it never existed. Another good example would be, say you, this happened a lot on family daycare homes. Someone had a supper, right? And they were serving supper and come in the middle of the fiscal year, they're like, oh, I'm not gonna do supper anymore. And so we just come in here and we delete that supper meal. Well, now we've paid you for several months of the fiscal year for suppers. And the auditors are seeing all these suppers we paid, but then they're looking at the application and there's no supper time. And our system did not retain that history. We couldn't even find it. We knew it had to be there because we know there's edits in place that if you don't have a supper time, and you've probably experienced that, you can't claim supper. You'll get a message in claims that says, you're not approved for this meal time. So we know it worked properly. We just couldn't prove it. And until we find a better way or enhance our system to capture that information, we're going to need you guys to submit a form. And so that's why we've implemented the new mealtime change form. So say I come in, I want to delete this mealtime. You're going to get this message that says, basically, you have to submit to us the change on the form. The form's in the resource library. We've put it in your manual, and you've probably heard, if you had the required training, your CACFP manual training, we've talked about it there. So what is going to happen, and this is only going to happen, and it's only going to be required when after your application is renewed or approved, right? You're going to get this message now, disregard it, because right now it's not approved. We're going to approve it, and then it's going to be from the time it's approved. So I keep repeating myself. So right now you can disregard it. So pretend your application's approved and you need to change a meal time. What's going to happen is it'll make the change for you, but it's going to kick this form back into a not approved status, right? So it's going to tell you, hey, you've got to submit this form and it's not going to be approved until we get this form. So you're going to make your changes, get the form, submit it to the person assigned to your application, and we'll have to come back and approve it. And it's just so we can capture what the time was and what you're changing it to, so we can cover our arrears when we have another audit, because it's going to happen. So Section B is any comments. This used to be where we kept your directions, but we don't really need directions because nobody really used that anyways. We all have GPS and use that, or we just know where you guys are. So we don't need directions, but we left it here for a comment box. What I would ask you guys, if for any reason you're operating any differently than normal, this would especially apply to our nonprofits and our schools. Because of COVID, if you're doing anything out of the norm that you would not do in a non-COVID world, put a comment here so we can know to follow up and make sure we have the information we need from you. Section C, are you a private nonprofit institution? Yes or no. This just indicates whether or not we need to get a 501c3 from you, but it does not apply to like tribes or faith-based. Does your center now participate, or have you ever participated in any other programs? If you're renewing, you should say yes. And just briefly say, like, I've been on CACFP since 2012 or what have you. If you're operating NSLP, if you're a school or breakfast, if you've ever done summer food program, you need to put those here because that's what that's asking. Do you have a head start or not? D, this is just, we're wanting to know how meals are provided. Okay, so I had a question real quick. Let me read it. Since the 15-minute grace period. Okay, so way back when, a long time ago, it's my understanding, everyone in our programs had a 15-minute grace period for mealtime service. And then it went away at some point for centers, and we still had it for family daycare homes. And if what I'm talking about doesn't make any sense, then just disregard it all. But for those of you that know anything about us ever having a 15-minute grace period, it's now been eliminated for everyone for meal times. We just need to know when you're beginning your meal time and when you're ending it. And it just got really complicated. We did have the grace that would allow you to start 15 minutes before or after your meal time, just to provide some flexibility, because it is pretty unreasonable to think that you guys are always going to start exactly at the same time every day. Like, we get that, but it got too complicated to know what you guys were doing if the meal time listed on the page wasn't really when you were starting. So if you need some extra time for your meal service, I think as a rule of thumb, everybody pretty much does the 30-minute window, which is pretty reasonable. But there is no regulation, and we have no state requirement that tells you how long your meal time has to be, or that it can't be any longer than. You decide that. So if you have a situation, especially for like your breakfast and your PM snack, when you got kids trickling in, you know, and you want to make sure you feed them and you want to make sure you can claim it, just extend your meal time, you know, do an hour. If it gets much beyond that, we'll question, like, why do you need that long of a service time? And, you know, we'll work with you. But what we need to see on your application is when we can show up and see a meal and when we can expect it to end, just so we can make sure our consultants are coming out and actually can observe that meal time. Okay. We're not trying to be rigid. We're trying to make sure that we can come out and see what's happening and you guys don't get written up for something that could have been prevented. Okay, so methods by which your meals are provided. Every site really should only have one of these first five selections. This is like, how are you making your meals? Are you making it there on site? Do you prepare at a central kitchen and then bring them to the site? So most of you are just going to be this one. Unless you're multi-sided, you might have a central kitchen. If you're under contract with any other outside entity, a vendor, a local school system provides your meals, or a food service management company, you have to have the correct contract in place. So you really should have only one of these five selected. Like I said, the vast majority are going to be this one. You cook your meals there, right? This one we just kind of dumped in here because we didn't have another place for it. But if you contract with any other service to do anything for you that has anything to do with CACFP, if it's menu creating, if it's paperwork, record keeping, you have to have a contract in place with them. So make sure that you are properly procuring people that you're using funds to pay, CACFP funds to pay. And even if you're not paying them with CACFP funds, you still need to list them as an authorized representative, because if anyone is doing anything that has anything to do with the administrative responsibilities of the CACFP, we have to know about them and we have to make sure they're trained. So E, your number of enrolled participants has to be listed here, and this is for for-profit sites only. And like I said, we have a few family daycare homes in here. This does not apply to you guys, so disregard. But this is only for our for-profit institutions, like I mentioned earlier. This is where it determines your eligibility. You have to at least 25% for your reduced or Title 20. Section D is pretty cut and dry, but I think we get a lot of the mistakes here. Generally, we just fix it for you guys, but this really is two separate sections. We need to know if there's who's responsible at that site that has any program related duties. And then we need to know who has the program administrative duties. You at least have to have one person here who has administrative duties. So we don't need to know the person's name. We just need to know their title. Just need to know the title and their duties and add it. This flag here tells me that you have this director person and they have the administrative duties. They may do everything else too, but you might also want to put, your cook. Because they have program duties. They're cooking and making sure meal patterns are met and whatnot. But you see there's not a flag here. So many times we get a person, and that's because this one on top, you just type it in and click add and move on. We have to have someone with that flag. So if you only have one person that does everything, make sure you enter it on that bottom section, and so they can get that flag. Section E, and this is another one that's a little different on family daycare homes. I think multi-sided daycare centers still have to report this year. Family daycare homes don't have this in the bottom of their provider application. And we can look at provider applications at the end. But here for the ethnic racial makeup, this might have been super frustrating in the past for many of you, because when you put this data in here, it has to equal your actual enrollment, right? Well, USDA took away the ability for us to visually observe the race and ethnicity of a child. And although it places the burden back on you guys to figure out how to collect that information, and in true USDA fashion, we're still waiting on further guidance on what to do, and we're not sure when that will come. But what we can tell you is we can't just look at a child and assume their race. And I use this example in every training I've done. If I were to show you a picture of my child, you would just be like, he's white and he is not Hispanic, because he has blonde hair, blue eyed, fairest skin you've ever seen, right? But he's an Japanese. You would never guess that with that child. I just knew he was going to come out dark headed and brown like his dad, but he sure didn't. And you just can't assume that the race of anyone just by looking at them. So I respect that that's been changed, because it's just not an accurate way to collect that data. But now you're going to have to really encourage your parents to self-report. We can't make them, but we got to encourage them, because it's important for funding. It's important for our programs to represent, all the ethnicities and racial breakdown for all our programs. So all of our programs have to report it. So make sure you're encouraging them to do it. And for our daycare centers, all of our institutions that have to use the family size and income applications, it's on there. It's on the income application where you can have them, encourage them to report it. If you don't do the income application, and you like federally funded Head Starts, we have a separate enrollment for you. It's not on there, but I did create a separate enrollment. If you go to the resource library and look, I think it's under general form. I think I just put race/ethnicity enrollment. I created one, and I created one for family daycare homes too, where you can collect that, because not everyone in our programs are using the income applications. And so we don't have any other material for you to collect it on. So we didn't want you to have to create your own material. So we have something for you already that's got those 5 races and that ethnicity on it, so the parents can record it if they choose to. But you'll see on all of those things, it all says optional. But like I said, I would encourage your families to report it when they feel comfortable. The one thing that you will remember maybe is that when you would put that information here and you click save, it would say, hey, this doesn't add up to equal your enrollment. Well, we turn that off, because now if you have individuals who aren't reporting and you're not visually observing, it's not going to equal your enrollment because we don't have that data. Something else that we've sort of missed the boat on is you could only select one race per child. And so that's very unrealistic nowadays. Like I said before, when I would fill out my child, I would click white and Asian. But when you report it here, before we made this change, you would have to pick one or the other. Okay, so now you can record multiple ones, and you can leave children out because these don't have to add up to equal your enrollment now. I hope that makes sense. Probably what's going to happen in the future is we're going to add 2 more boxes, and it's going to be one for not reported and then one for 2 or more races, so that we're really collecting that information accurately, because I don't really think we have been this far. Any questions on that? Did have a question in section D. Do we have to list all staff names who serve? Yes, you can just put, that's why it's number of employees. So if you have teachers who serve meals and you have 12, just put teachers serve meals 12. That's a good question. Okay, so anyway, I ramble on about that. We took that edit off so it doesn't, you can report, encourage your families to report, and you're just going to report whatever you get. Training, you just have to say, yep, we've been trained on all these topics. Please don't click it if you haven't really had your training. The training is mandatory this year. You guys know that, and this training does not count as that. So make sure you go to the manual training and you can attest that you've had your training. Any questions on any of this? The most important changes on here are the mealtime change. So disregard that message right now, but after you're approved and you need to change it, you got to do that form. And then we've turned this edit off so that it doesn't have to meet or equal your enrollment. And that's it on that one. Adult questionnaires. If you're not an adult, you don't have to fill it out. If you are an adult daycare center, you do have to fill it out. You do have to have, you know, certain types of programs, and there's other certain requirements. And basically, as with a lot of our forms, they basically tell you in the question what you need to have to qualify or to operate, and you're just going to tell us how you do it. So answer all of these to the best of your ability. Same thing with your at-risk questionnaire. This one's kind of tricky, especially if you're multi-sided, because a lot of these questions, probably you can just have one response for all your sites. How you operate, when you plan to operate. Does your program include organized and regular activities in a structured and supervised environment? That has to be yes. Number 4 has to be yes as well. So it could get tricky, like if you have different activities at different sites, we need to know what activities are at those sites. So when our consultants come out, we know what we're looking for. Many times, a lot of them are going to be the same. A lot of our institutions do tutoring or some type of educational thing like that. And that's fine too. But if they're different per site, let us know. Then number 5, you can include organized athletics into your at-risk program, but you can't just serve, like, we want to serve the football team on Fridays before game. You can't do that. You can have an activity and enrichment or whatever type of program where you serve a meal that's open to all the population of children that also includes your football team on Friday nights, but it can't just be for the football team. Okay, and so now we've come to the administrative budget. This is changed for all our independent institutions. Anyone that's multi-sided that's on this call right now, it's going to be very familiar to you. But for our single-sided, it's very much different now. We didn't do it to be difficult, but it is a lot different. It is much more detailed, but I really think it's going to help you guys be able to think outside the box and realize what our funds can be used to pay for that you might not have realized, right? Like I said, I'm in a test account and sometimes it doesn't work right. So make sure your budget year reflects your fiscal year. It's probably not really going to change what you put in these numbers here, because pretty much you're gonna have the same, it might fluctuate, but you pretty much have the same cost every month. So you're going to budget on a 12-month budget, unless your schools, because schools don't operate all 12 years. Okay, so this top section, part A, just like in the old budget that you guys remember that it's changed for, it's just for administrative expenses. So when we are talking about administrative expenses, it has nothing to do with the food or the serving meals or any of that. It's just for the paperwork part of that side, okay? So you might not have something in all of these, and that's fine. but we might have stuff listed here you didn't think about before that could be an allowable cost. And just like with any budget, this is just a projection. It doesn't mean with your administrative costs that you'll even have the funds at the end of the month to use to pay for these things. But it's important to know that if it's not in here in your approved budget, you cannot use our funds to pay for it. So it's kind of, it's good to think of all the things you can put in here so that at the end of the month, when you do have funds left over after you've paid for your food and your milk and your food service people, and you've paid for your cook's salary or whatever, if that's what you do, if you have money left over, you have to spend it, and it has to be on allowable cost. But you can only do that if it's in your approved budget. And so that's what we're finding a lot on reviews is that, as you know, you can't make a profit on this program. And when we say that, we say you have to operate at a nonprofit status. And that kind of blows some people's minds because the vast majority of our institutions are for profit. And we understand you're for profit, but this program is its own entity and it has to be operated as a nonprofit and a nonprofit status. You can't make a profit off of it. But at the same time, you have to show that you're financially viable. And that means you have supplemental income to pick up the slack when you didn't have enough funds to cover the cost. So it's important to include as much as you can in your administrative budget. So you can't get any numbers in any of these columns without clicking this open. We've already had several applications that have been submitted and nothing's been entered here because it will let you submit it with nothing, but we won't approve it because we know that there are costs to operate your program. We have to know what it costs to operate your entire program, not just CACFP, your entire business. And the reason for that, and some of you will have to work with, especially when you're tribal or military and schools, because you guys get astronomical amounts of, you have a huge budget, especially military and tribal. I don't even know that we could fit that many digits in some of these boxes for you guys. So we'll work with you, but the vast majority of our institutions should have no problem with being able to report exactly how much it costs you in a year for all your salaries and administrative labor. Keep in mind, your people who you pay to do the food service labor still go down here in Part B. So you got to open this up and you got to enter in each individual person, with the exception of other people who may not have any cost. If you don't use our money to pay for them, you still have to report them. And that's when we can allow you to put them in like this. So let me just open this one up here. I've got me, I'm the director. And the way this works now, it's essentially kind of the same as it was before. Before we operated, or we had you enter it in as a percentage, right? And you probably remember that we capped it out at 20% for directors and assistant directors as the maximum amount of the salary you could pay for using CACFP funds. The way this one works is based on the number of hours. And what we consider a full year at full-time number of hours is 2,080 hours. That's 40 hours a week times 52 weeks. So that's how these are set up. That would just be if you're a full-time person. They're eligible to have 2,080 hours to do something in the year for your business, right? We need to know of those 2,080 hours of that full-time person. What did they spend doing it? How many hours are they doing non-CACFP duties? And how many hours are they doing CACFP duties? In the old budget, like I said, we based it on percentages. So 20% of 2,080 hours is 416. So this is important for you to know. If you're used to capping it out at 20%, 416 hours is 20%, okay? There's not to say, there's always an exception to that rule. If you can show that you're really using more hours, if you're doing some type of time audit, or you're really logging your hours to show you spend more hours than 416 a year doing CACFP work, by all means, submit that to us and we will humor approving anything you've got documentation for. But if you don't do that, this would be what you cap out at, and it's pretty reasonable. Then you would need to put 600 or 1664 and whatever. It doesn't have to necessarily be here. You could put it in one of these other things so that Column 2 and 3 add up to be 2,080. So you enter your hours. And then over here, you enter the total wage and the total taxes. And this is important to point out too. This is why we can allow you guys to pay your employees with cash or Cash App or Venmo. We're seeing that an awful lot. You have to pay taxes and we have to see proof of that. And we see that through your payroll, but we want to make sure you're reporting it in your application now that it's congruent with what we're seeing during a review. What if employees are paid salary instead of hourly? So the hours are just to record it's still to come up with the percentage, because you see here, you've got 416 hours of CACFP divided by the total hours. It gives us 20%. So the hours are purely just to determine the percentage of their salary that is an allowable cost for CACFP. Does that make sense? Because you're still just going to report their annual wage here. Whether they're paid hourly or their salary, you should be able to calculate their annual wage. And that's what's going to go here. And then you're going to put their annual taxes. And so you can see here, like I said, we have the total amount of wages and taxes. It's calculated the total annual percentage. And so this is the allowable cost for me as a director. Is a timesheet required for staff who exclusively perform CACFP duties? No, but it's highly recommended. You can never have too much documentation in this program. So while I can't say it's required, I would recommend it. Because it is an allowable cost. If your cook just cooks and that's all they do, they go buy groceries and cook, and they might plan menus, that's 100% allowable, and we will approve that. But you know, what if they also are a van driver? That happens a lot. They go run the van and pick up kids to and from. That's where it might get questionable if we're paying for 100% of their salary, but they're also doing other duties. So it can't hurt to have that. So does this make sense how to enter this in? You're going to enter it for anyone who you're using our funds to pay for a portion of their salary that do admin jobs. That's you. You guys are sitting here listening to me ramble on about this because you're getting ready to do this application. That's an administrative duty. It's the person who submits the claims, records your meal counts, creates your menus, things like that. So you're going to do that for each of your individuals, but we also need to know about your individuals who you don't use our funds to pay for, because this plays into your whole role of if you're a financially viable institution. So this is how we're asking you guys to record that. You would want everyone else who, in some of these, and like I said, I might be muddying the waters because sometimes you're using our funds to pay for teacher salaries, a portion of them too, and that's still required. But this is just an example to show you. We still need you to put, you can just lump all your other administrative people, all your other people that you pay salaries to, you can lump them together. If they're not being paid with our funds, just dump them together in one form. And you're going to say that 100% of their hours, they're doing non-CACFP stuff, right? That's going to calculate, you're going to have your total amount of wages for all those people dumped into one form. And it's at 0%. And so 0% of their salary is paid with our funds, but we still see that's a cost for you. It still costs you to operate that program and pay those people, even though you're not using our funds. So then when you get them all in here, it's weird. It's another one of those things that it's not working right for me, but it's because I'm in a test one. I'm going to enter a new one. Oh, see, we fiddle around with this so much we get it messed up. Okay, so see here, we have all these people listed. And here's your entire institution budget. So this is all my teachers and everyone. This is what I spend in a year for salaries and well, we hadn't gotten to benefits. But this is the amount that I've calculated that I need to use CACFP funds to pay for if I have the money left over at the end of the month. And then as we're approving applications, we'll come back and approve these amounts, assuming they're all within the allowed amounts. Any questions on salaries? The only difference really is that we're asking you to list the people individually who we pay using CACFP funds. and that we're calculating it by hours now and not just 20% or percentages. Benefits, this is an allowable cost. So if you pay for benefits for your staff, that is something you can use our funds to help pay for. So you'll see here, let me go, I'm gonna add an item. Only I remain in the drop down to select, because you could see Edgar and the 12 teachers were already added. So I just am gonna make stuff up here. We don't do life or disability, and sorry, no retirement either. And you see here, it's auto-populating that 20%. So the same amount of percentage that's allowed for your salaries based on hours is auto-populating. So that's the total amount that's allowable for your benefits too. You just got to put in the amount that you pay annually for that person, and it's going to calculate the allowed amount for CACFP. Clear as mud? So here's what it costs. Like, we had our teachers in there too. See, teachers cost me that much a year, which it's, I know, far more than that. But they're at 0%. So it's $0 as a cost of the CACFP. Any questions so far? Okay. Administrative expenses. We're not asking for any more than we were before, but it might feel that way. We've broken it all apart so that you can be specific about how you're spending our money. So equipment purchased $2,500 or more. Generally, you're not going to have anything here. Generally, if you're going to go out and have to purchase some equipment, it's because like your freezer went out and you had to just go out and buy it, right? So we get that, but it still needs to be in your budget. And while I've said that just now, any of you guys that are receiving any emergency funding, if you know what I'm talking about, those of you that were eligible and you've gotten a letter that says, hey, you're eligible, you're getting this amount, you have to use that on allowable cost. And if it's not something already in your budget, you got to go back and put it in there. So that's one thing we're missing every year is like, once this budget's approved, it's just like out of you're like, oh, thank God that's done. And you don't think about it again until next September, October. But we need to remember this is like a living, evolving document. When your situation changes, your application needs to reflect that. So when your consultant comes out and does a review, it's all in a line. Like, your budget reflects what you're really putting on your expenditure worksheet, and then your bank records are really showing that's what you're really paying for. And we're not finding that's always the case. So I say all that. If you have an emergency that you have to go out and purchase something, you can use our funds to pay for things like a refrigerator or a freezer or something like that. And it might happen before you get it in your budget, but always come back and put it in your budget, okay? Materials and supplies are broken up into durable and expendable. Durable would be something that's going to last more than a year, right? It's not just like a throwaway. So examples of this would be like desks, chairs, computers. Yes, you can use our funds to help pay for things like that. A computer, you're required to have a computer because you have to get online to do this, or an iPad or things like this. However, it's got to be a reasonable prorated amount because you're going to use that same computer or that same desk in that office to perform other duties, right? Expendable stuff would be like office supplies. We don't need you to put one in here for paper and one for pens and what have you. Just put, look at what last year's budget, if you have it broken down well enough to see about what did you spend on office supplies. We know you guys do a great deal of printing because of this program, because you got to keep all of our paperwork, on hand, unless you are all electronic, which that's fine too, but it's still got to be as readily available. But if you print all this paperwork off, paper and ink is an allowable cost. But if you print for other things, you have to put that into the equation because we can't pay for 100% of your paper and ink when you print stuff like for VHS and things like that. Does that make sense? So to add an item, it's kind of confusing and it wants quantity, but like, we'll just say paper. We don't really know the quantities, so you can just say one, because you can just put one. You might buy 5 or 6 boxes a year, I don't know. But the point is here to get the annual amount that it's going to cost you. So if you know last year you spent $1,000 on paper, just put it in like that. And then say you print paper, all your printing is for DHS stuff and CACFP stuff. You don't print anything else other than those two programs. A reasonable amount would be 50%. Generally, you're going to be printing other stuff, though. You're going to have other stuff for your programs. So anyway, my point is, it's just got to be a reasonable percentage. Put it in there, calculate, add, and there you go. Printing and postage, you're probably not going to, a lot of you aren't going to have these on here. What documentation is required if funds are used to purchase kitchen equipment? You just like with any other purchase, you got to maintain your receipts. Anything under this amount, I mean, you don't have, it's not going to be approved ahead of time or anything. Still make sure you're, following proper procurement. But anything under that small purchase threshold is still just considered micro purchasing. So, but you guys know you're getting you want to get your biggest bang for your buck, and not, I know everybody can't just afford to willy-nilly buy whatever you want. You're looking for the best. But just keep your receipts for any purchases like that. If you do something on application renewal, or even when you come back and do a budget revision, we probably will ask to see the receipt just so we can make sure we're properly approving that, but maybe not always. It's just a case-by-case situation, but with any purchase, you're going to keep your receipt like anything else. But back to this printing and postage, a lot of you probably won't have this. Like if you're going and doing some professional printing, if you're sending all of our forms somewhere to be printed rather than you printing them in your office on a printer, that would be what would go here. Postage, I mean, that would be like if you're mailing stuff to us, or if you're mailing family size and income applications to your homes, things like that. Most of you probably wouldn't have an expense, but there is an allowable amount that you can use our funds to pay for it. Office space, rental, and lease. So the important thing here is if you own your building, you can't pay yourself rent. The only way you can incur a cost for a rental or lease, or if you have a mortgage on the building you're in, is if it's actually costing you something every month. If you own it, there's no cost incurred. So we've got to get this entered in here, and we're missing this on a lot of folks. So you're putting it, you're writing it off as an expense on your expenditure worksheet, but we aren't capturing it in the application. So that's what we're trying to do here now. So most of you that are renting or leasing would be between unrelated parties, or even if you're mortgaging, it's between unrelated parties, and you'll need to do this office space agreement. It's pretty simple. Put in the name of the company or the lesser name, the address, the dates of the rental or lease agreement. Indicate if you have any of these, either of these things. And then number 5 is probably the trickiest part. This is where it's determining the allowable amount. And we try to explain this, and I think a lot of you understand it when we're out on a review, but this is just flat out doing it for you. So you can pay for a portion of your mortgage or rent or your lease with our funds, but it has the prorated amount that's used for CACFP, right? And the way to determine that, you get your total square footage, and it goes here. And then you gotta have to kind of get a good guesstimate of the amount of square footage you use for CACFP. So that if you have a kitchen, well, you obviously have a kitchen, and maybe you have a cafeteria. If you don't, it would be like a portion of your rooms that you serve, where you serve, your shared areas, you can do a portion of your office space. And then you would put that total square footage that you use devoted to CACFP. And it's going to calculate the allowable amount based on your square footage. Then you put in your total annual office rental and calculate, and it's going to calculate it all for you. It takes that 30% and applies it to the annual amount, and $3,600 is your allowable cost to CACFP. And as a rule of thumb, what I tell people is on all your other things, if you're just really not sure on a good prorated percentage to use, this would be a good one to go by, right? So if you've got a clear-cut methodology for how you've determined how much of your rent or your mortgage you can use, this would be good to apply to your utilities, things like that. Got a question? After adding salaries, employer taxes, and selecting calculate, there's not a further selection to add it anywhere. Do you not see update? Let me add a new one. You don't have an add button? You guys won't have this here. But do you have an add button?
I do not, no add or update, so I'm just not sure how to insert it.
Really? It could be, because it changes to update after it's been added. What browser are you using?
I'm on Google Chrome. That's what I was wondering if I need to do Safari.
No, that's what I'm on right now. But there is no, you see calculate, add, is there a clear entry or close? Scroll down. Because maybe that's
Okay,
it.
so right at first, it does have the add item, and I can call after. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it does have, so at the beginning, when you go to add it, I do see all of those where it shows add item and close, but then once I enter it, it stops at the calculate. So I'll keep playing with it though, and I'll call if I can.
Okay, you might open it back up because mine I have to scroll down. And you can't make the box any bigger.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so like I saw on your utilities, like schools, other bigger institutions might have their own meter that's separate just for the cafeteria. And so then they could be 100% of what that electric bill is. Most of you aren't operating that way. So a good way to calculate the allowable amount would be going by the percentage calculated off your square footage. So OG&E or whatever your electric is, water, gas, all those things are allowable costs, not at 100%, but at whatever methodology you use to prorate that amount. Insurance premiums, those are allowable costs like business insurance premiums, even a portion of, if you're driving to purchase the groceries, there is a portion that you could pay for your car insurance because you are using your vehicle to perform a CACFP duty. Contracted professional services, so this would be like an accountant, or if you have a consulting agency that helps with paperwork that you're paying with CACFP funds, or even if you're not paying with CACFP funds, if you're contracting with someone and you're paying them with just your own personal money or business from your business account or what have you, they still need to be here, but you'll still, allocate 0% to CACFP. We need to know who those people are. I can't think of any other good examples that would go there. Equipment rental lease, not a lot of you are going to have that. That would be like most I see like a copier rental, but a lot of you are just not going to have equipment that large, but you can, it is allowable cost. Communications would be where your cell phone, cell phones really are kind of tricky. Cell phones are only actually allowed when it's for someone working solely for CACFP, and generally we only allow that for multi-sided, mostly because there's travel involved and things like that. But if all you have is a cell phone for your institution, it could be an allowable cost, but it would be your communications, your internet, cable, things like that would go here. Advertising, public information. So if you are really doing a public release and you really are paying for it, and it is about CACFP, it is an allowable cost. If you're advertising your company, your business, and there's nothing in it about CACFP, then you wouldn't be able to use our funds to pay for it. But if you're advertising your daycare and you say, hey, we're also on a federally funded food program, then yeah, you're also advertising the food program, and you could use a portion of, you could pay for a portion of that advertisement with our funds. Dues, membership, subscriptions. So mostly this would be for like, if you pay for ProCare or Minute Menu or some type of subscription, monthly subscription you're using for business purposes. There are situations like if you're part of a organization, especially if it's like the CACFP National Association, obviously that would be 100% allowable because it's CACFP. But there's other associations that you might be part of that if you has anything to do with nutrition, then it could be considered allowable. And we would just approve those on a case-by-case situation. And then mileage, that's not a new one. You guys had that in the old budget. As always, I would highly encourage you to keep a very detailed mileage log to support anything you pay for mileage with CACFP funds. Part B is for operating costs. And this is where you put your food and cost or your food and milk cost. And these ones are easy. Just type in the full amount. CACFP food related supplies. That's anything else other than food and milk. And then your food service labor is entered just like the other ones, right? Except it's a little bit easier. We only have one column. These people generally are going to be all you pay them, like your cook or your teacher or what have you, pay them out of CACFP funds to do some type of food service related job. So let me add one. We're just going to say here, she's the cook and she spends 8,000. She spends half her time cooking and she spends the other half cleaning. And we're going to pay her, that looks good. So generally these are for people that they're spending 100% of their time doing CACFP duties, because generally those people are. But you might have some situations where you need to put your teachers in there that you pay a couple of hours. And that's fine too. You would only report the number of hours, the couple of hours a day that you could allow for your teachers to serve meals. One thing we did add here is because we have some institutions where they do the cooking and the cleaning and everything food service related, but they don't use CACFP funds to pay for them. You might not use our money to pay for anything other than food or milk. And this whole budget may seem completely arbitrary and overkill. And it kind of is, but we still have to know what it costs to operate your entire institution. We have to know what it costs to operate the CACFP. So with all that said, if you have individuals that do these duties that are CACFP that would generally be paid with our funds, but your institution covers the cost, this mostly applies to like our schools and our tribes. They generally just use our funds to pay for food and milk, and that's about it. You can say that, okay, here's what it cost us, but the salary is not paid with CACFP funds. When I do that, basically it's going to exclude that person from the budget, the CACFP budget. So you can see here that it's a cost. It cost us to employ Lisa and Karen, right? And here I can open it up and see what it cost us to pay them. But when I check that box and say, hey, I'm not using your funds to pay them, it's going to put it at 0 in your budget for CACFP. And the food service, if you didn't give them benefits, you wouldn't necessarily, you could put 0 on those. But does that make sense? If you're using our funds, you want to leave that unchecked. So it does put them in your budget from your CACFP budget. Okay, part C really hasn't changed at all either. That's just where you're recording your income. And this is super important. So like I said, it's kind of a catch-22 with what we're trying to find here in this budget. We got to make sure that you aren't making a profit off this program, right? We got to see that, you know, you're spending everything on allowable costs, but we also have to see that you're a viable institution. So if you've done this before, and all of you have, you'll know that it shouldn't let me submit it. Yeah. So you see how it says, I can't submit this if I have an operational loss. You have to show a profit on this budget. And that's where it throws some people off. Like, well, I thought we can't make a profit. This is a budget for your entire institution. We need to see that your entire institution is financially viable and you are making a profit, that your doors are open, you're here. Granted, it's been a struggle for a lot of you for the last 18 months. It has for all of us, but you're still making it, you're still viable. That's what we're looking for here. So you want to make sure in Part C, you're including every bit of revenue you might have. It is split apart here, your childcare and daycare DHS money is split apart from federal funding. I don't know why we do that, because on the funds received, it's all together, but make sure you put all your Title 20. You're gonna report your reimbursement here, your CSCFP reimbursement. You're gonna include all your other federal funding here. And you might get grants, you might have donations, you might have other miscellaneous income. Even if you're using your personal savings to make things stay afloat, or if you have still funds left over from a PPP loan or something like that, like what are you using to stay afloat and to be a viable institution? You need to put that in your income, because if you show that you're at a loss, it won't let you save it and move on. So I'm just making stuff up. Make a lot of money. It's a lot of zeros to put there. So once it goes into not a red, and I would recommend, if you ever put anything on miscellaneous, to make a note down here. What is that miscellaneous? So we know what we're looking for, because we are going to start looking at that a little more when we're doing a review. Where is your other funding coming from? Any questions on this? Going into next year, 2023, not this year, but be prepared that we've changed this budget now, we're capturing more, but what's going to happen is on application renewal next year in 23, we're going to be looking at what you actually spent closer. So you have this projected budget. It should be a budget you're updating as changes are made. So say you've got your people listed individually that you're paying with CACFP funds, right? Well, if mid-year Karen leaves, don't take Karen off the budget, but you need to come in here and adjust Karen down to what you've actually paid her for the fiscal year. But then you need to add the new cook you hire. And I know right now that it's a revolving door for you guys. It's hard to keep staff. It's hard to get staff, and it's hard to keep them, and we get it. And we don't expect you to have to come and update this every single time a change is made. But I would get accustomed to making sure that when it's time to do your claim, that you're making sure your budget hasn't had any updates. That would be a good time just for you to remember that, oh, hey, I need to go in there and update it, because it needs to be reflective of what's really happening. Because we're having so many findings and reviews where our budgets aren't matching what we're doing, then our bank records are showing something different, and we're having to take money back. So just make sure it's as up to date as possible. And like I said, what we consider a profit in this program is more than 3 months worth of your reimbursement, basically. So we understand that some months you may have a little left of CACFP funds, and some months you may not have had near enough to even cover the cost of food and milk. But at the end of the year, you should not, if you have a positive balance, you should not have more than 3 months worth of your reimbursement or your operating costs. What does it cost? How much does it cost you to operate for 3 months? If you exceed that amount, you'll have to pay money back. And so we look at that during a review, but we need to be looking at it at the end of the year too. So be looking for that and more training to come on this throughout this next year, because you will have to be reporting that at the end of the year, like an end of year type of report. That's not required now, but it's just a heads up for what's to come a year from now. Okay, so the rest of it, your paper documents, as you know, there's certain things you have to have on file. If it's been uploaded, there should be a check here. Before you can submit, you have to click the submitted by entity. If something's missing and you try to submit, you need to reach out to the person assigned to your application to get it uploaded if you're missing it. Those things would be like your certificate of authority. You wouldn't have access if it wasn't in there. But if you're having an agreement with someone to furnish your food, if you're daycare, you have to have your license. You have to have your Title 20 contract if you're Title 20. This year, we're kind of, DHS does those renewal letters for you guys, if you know what I'm talking about, just for us. When your contract renews and they send you the email about the website and you have to go and get the renewal letter, DHS only does that for our benefit. And so we're kind of trying to go away from that. And so what we're asking this year is We want your original contract if you have it, your Title 20 contract. If you're not Title 20, you don't know what I'm talking about, then just plug your ears. But we're really after that original contract. If you don't have it, don't panic. Go get that renewal letter for your Title 20 and we'll accept it. Because eventually, you know, as time goes on, those renewals or those contracts have to be renewed when policy changes or something, and we'll eventually get your contract on file. But if you have your original Title 20 contract, that's what we're asking from you guys this year, okay? If you don't have it, go get that renewal letter and we'll accept that. We're trying to make it easier because sometimes that renewal website isn't ready by the time we already have our application ready, and we're trying to not have to hold anybody up for that. Okay, and then the one thing we added is you have to put your date of original application submission here. So many people forget to click this button. You fill out all these forms, and somebody asked earlier, like, well, what if I need to go ahead and submit this? You're not going to look at it? No, we're not going to look at any of this until you click this button. This button tells us, hey, I'm ready for you to look at my application, so don't forget to push it. But before you push it, you have to put this date. The reason we've done that is because it's gotten confusing. As you know, if you submit and then we kick it back out and we're like, hey, we need you to fix some things, right? And one good indicator to know if something's been kicked out, if you see a check mark in something, you can click on these details. That means something's not right. So if you see a check mark on something, go click on details and it will appear right here. Like, oh, I need to go back and answer number 1. That's a terrible example to do it on because there's not a number 1 to answer. But if you see that, just know something is kicked back out, right? Well, this date that you type in is never going to change. That way we can make sure that we can honor those people when you originally submitted. If it was before October 31st, we will honor that and make you eligible for October, right? We may not get your application approved till later on, but we'll honor it because you originally submitted it. But it won't let you put any other date than the day's date that you're typing in there. Any questions? I'm going to switch over to a multi-sided application. If you're just an independent, regular, single-sided daycare, if you don't have any questions, this pretty much ends what we're talking about. You guys, you're welcome to hop off. You can stay on if you want. But I'm going to change this application type to look at a couple of different things for sponsors. And the one thing that I mentioned earlier, for sponsors here, you have your site maintenance on your business maintenance page. We did change it because it was another thing where things were getting updated here and we weren't being advised of it and we were losing track of stuff. So if you've been on and you've been multi-sided more than a year or so, you remember when you could go in here to site maintenance and change it yourself, and we made it where you can't do that. So sorry. So if something in here needs to be updated, you need to go and look at it, make sure it's all up to date. If anything needs updated, you need to reach out to your assigned person and get them to change it, because you can't. Because a lot of these things auto-populate into something else, okay? So this is where all your site maintenance is done for all your individual sites. If you're multi-sided and you're new and you're on here and you go to site maintenance and there's nothing listed, we've got to get your sites added. So reach out to me or Karen Davis so we can get your sites added. So for a multi-sided application, the second form is your sponsor application. A lot of this is very redundant. It's going to be some of the same stuff that's listed on your application for participation that we already looked at. You guys know how to answer it. Brand new applicants really only have to do number 7. So if you're brand new and you're in here, you have to briefly explain the areas you plan to serve. And you know, even if you're renewing, you can put something there too. It's helpful for us because if we ever have a sponsor that, say, unfortunately gets terminated, or they're just choosing to close, we might have sites that need a new home. So if we know what areas you're serving, we can reach out to you and say, like, hey, we've got this institute, or we've got a site or a provider that needs a new sponsor, and at least we know where to reach out to. Number 8 is where you're listing the number of facilities you have. So depending on what type of operation you run will depend on where you're putting your numbers. Number 9 is your total number of enrolled participants. So here you're reporting number of sites, down here is your enrollment of children. Number 10. Number 10 is asking you how much money, how much federal money you have spent in the previous fiscal year. On that funds received form, we ask you how much you made. Here we're asking you how much you spent, but it's excluding CACFP. And then again, here's where your fiscal years populated. So if it's wrong from the business maintenance page and you need to change it there. This here for most everyone's going to be no, unless I've reached out to you and told you otherwise. We don't have a lot of unaffiliated sites. This has to be yes. Yes, you have to serve them all the same, regardless of who they are and where they are, how they look, what have you. And then 13 is your budget. I'm not going to go over in depth on this because we really just did that with the independent one and it works just the same. The only difference with our multi-sided is you have a few more categories that are allowable cost. Mostly just down here that has to do with travel and training because you're required to go do on-site monitoring and you're required to train all of your participants. So this isn't included on the other one we just looked at. So unless you are within walking distance of all your sites, which that might be the case for, say, a school district, you could walk to go do your on-site monitoring. But if you have to drive to it, that's an allowable cost. You have to go monitor. And we do have the monitoring waiver that I sent out to everyone last week, I think. If you're in here and you're multi-sided and you didn't get an email from me, let me know. But I think I reached out to everyone and sent the monitoring waiver. The waiver, the COVID waiver for monitoring doesn't waive monitoring. It just waives the requirement for you to be on site. So monitoring reviews can be done from your office, just a review of records basically. And you do not have to do a meal observation in one of those 3 visits. Part B works just the same. If you're a family daycare home, this Part B is grayed out for you because you don't have the cost for your site. Part C is your revenue, same as the other one. Part D only applies to centers as well. So when you're a sponsor of centers, you can only use 15%. No, Kathy, look at Part B. Oh, you want me to go over that? Okay. So I'm going to go back to Part B. It works just the same. It works just the same as the one we just went over. But I will have to make a disclaimer that, and Karen pointed it out to me yesterday, and we're working on it. If we have anyone in here, you remember how I showed you earlier, we had that box, oops, the little box that was here. If that applies to you where you have food service labor people and you're multi-sided and you don't use our funds to pay for them, we're getting that box added. So it will work the same way. But you need to make sure that you're listing your food service people here, just like we went over before in the last one, and only your admin people go up here. And again, we need to know the cost of your entire institution. So you might have people listed in here that, and you're seeing some of the same junk that I filled out because I'm in the same application. I just changed the application type. But some of these is going to be hard with you because, especially, I don't know if we have any tribes in here. Yeah, I think we do. Like you're going to have, I don't even think we can hold enough digits in these boxes for how much funding you guys have and what it costs. So we'll work with you on making sure we're capturing what we need. But for most of you, you should be able to report your entire institution budget and all your salaries. But make sure you're putting in your food and milk costs, CACFP related, and then your salaries here. And like I said, if you need that box where it doesn't include it in your CACFP budget, oops, hang tight, I'm getting it fixed. So maybe by the end of the week, we'll have it in there, Karen. Is there anything else you want me to go over, Karen? Okay. Part C is your revenue. Okay. Part D, back to this. This only applies to, like I said, our center sponsors. You can only use 15% of the projected reimbursement from CACFP to pay for your administrative costs. So C4, this is what we pay you. That's your projected amount for the coming year, right? Cannot be more than 15, or wait, this right here cannot be more than 15% of this. You can only use 15% of your projected reimbursement to pay for administrative costs. So what's happening here is sponsor in compliance with 15% rule? It says no, it automatically knows, it calculates it for us. Because it's taking $100,000 from here and figuring out 15% of that, which is $15,000. So I can only have $15,000 in administrative cost. So I'm either gonna have to increase my revenue, which is not likely unless you plan on adding a bunch of sites or something, or you're gonna have to decrease this. You're gonna have to decrease the amount that you're allocating to CACFP until that says yes, that you are in compliance. Part E, all calculates for you, except you got to put in the number of sites that you have. And it's just calculating your profit loss. And again, it's got to see that you're in a profit status, not loss. Same thing here on your income comments. If there's any miscellaneous stuff or anything that could help us or help your consultants better know what to look for during their review, please put that information there. Part F is for family daycare home sponsors only. So I think I've still got some of you guys in here, so I'll talk about, yeah, I've still got some family daycare homes. So as you know, if you're not a family daycare home, close your ears for a minute. Family daycare home sponsors are paid in a different way. Admin amount is calculated for them, and they're paid per provider, right? At the end of the year, we have to calculate what you were paid and what you were spent. And if you have any a positive balance, you're allowed to carry over 10% of what that amount is, what your 10% of what you made is. If it exceeds 10%, you got to pay it back. So family daycare homes are already used to having to send in some reconciliation information at the end of the year, end of year of report, so that we can see exactly what they spent. So be prepared for that. I know you can't really do that until after September is over, so be looking for that. Ah, stink. I'm gonna have to go. To get to page 2, I have to actually fill in the application. So I'm going to go back to a really old application that I filled out many years ago when I was a family daycare home sponsor. Because page 2, dang it. Hold on. Uh-oh. I want to get to page 2 so we can go over it real quick, and then we'll be done. There we go. Okay, so regardless of the type of institution you are, if you're multi-sited, page 2 is required. And some of it's redundant now that we've included some of these questions on that BCA page. So we might be doing some fiddling with this and taking some of these questions off here in the future. I don't know. But section A is about record collection and fund disbursement. So this one is, how are you collecting your records, like family and size income applications, things like that. If you're tiering providers, if you're family daycare home, how are you collecting that and determining eligibility? These only hold 300 characters, so you can't write a novel here either. So be as detailed as you can in 300 characters or less. Describe where your records will be maintained and who has access to them. This is one of them that's redundant. So just put the same thing you did on that first page. Describe your accounting system used to collect, record, maintain. Again, redundant, just summarize what you already put on the BCA questions. This one I like to really go over because many times, like I said, our questions basically state what you have to do, and then we need you to tell us how you do it. So family daycare homes really are about the only ones that really do this. We might have some sponsors of centers, but it is regulatory that, okay, you submit one claim and we pay you one lump sum, right, when you're multi-sited, but you have to go in there and put the individual site amount. It's regulatory that when you get that lump payment, you have 5 days from the receipt of that payment to pay your site, if that's in fact how you operate, okay? So family daycare homes always operate this way. Your family daycare homes always are getting payments, but your sponsors or centers, the sponsor may incur the cost, right? You might they might say they have a credit card and that center just goes and buys what they need and you guys pay the bills. Or say you have a central kitchen where the sponsor pays for all the food, does all the shopping, and the meals are dispersed. If you're not actually sending money to your site, you should not answer this question saying, yes, I will pay them within 5 days. And so many times that happens because it's basically just saying, tell me how you're meeting this regulation, but that's not really what you're doing. So make sure that you're just telling us how you do it. If you incur the cost and you have a central kitchen and the sponsor pays for everything and you just disperse the meals, or if you have some other way, but if you're not actually sending a check or a direct deposit to your sites, don't answer this that way. Section B, we removed the visual observation stuff like we talked about earlier. This one is where it's just a summary, and not a summary, a sum of all your site totals. Eventually, we didn't get to it this year, but eventually I want it to just, you're already putting it on site based. Hopefully next year we can get this where it'll just calculate the numbers for you and you won't have to do it. This one here is it's not enrollment, it's your potential beneficiaries. So you can get that from the census data. You can get it from your local school system. You can call us, we can help you, but you have to report your potential beneficiaries. Section C is about your monitoring. So the first question is about how are you conducting your on-site approval visits, which for right now is waived, but answer these in a non-COVID way, right? Tell us what you're going to do pre-COVID, how you conduct your pre-approval visits. Even if you don't plan to add any new sites, you still have to have a procedure in the event that you ever gain a new site, okay? Then sponsors have to conduct monitoring reviews, per regulation. So you can either conduct one announced or two unannounced, or do review averaging. The vast majority of our institutions do this because it's just easier. Review averaging requires you to submit a schedule so that we're making sure that still on average you're conducting 3 per site or per provider. My recommendation is to stick to this one because it's easier. You don't have to do an additional schedule or anything. You still have to kind of have a schedule to show when we're out on a review. We have to see how you're keeping up and scheduling reviews to make sure they're done timely. But you don't have to go and do the calculations to make sure everyone has 3. If someone needs some extra love, just go give them some extra love because you're going to have sites that need some extra help. So you got to make sure your visits are considered unpredictable. So how are you going to do that? That's a pretty hard thing to answer, but just make sure you're not going to go the same week of the month every year. You're going to pick a different meal time. How are you going to do your best to make them unpredictable, which is impossible right now because if you're doing the monitoring waiver, it's pretty predictable, but answer in a non-COVID world. And describe your recruitment policy and procedures. Okay, so if you're not recruiting, this mostly applies to our family daycare home centers. If you're not recruiting, it's okay to say you're recruiting, but give us some kind of procedure that if we were, like I said before, if we were to approach you and say, we have someone in this area, this site that needs a new home, and needs a new sponsor, explain how you would go, what would be your procedure. You're still required to have a procedure if you don't plan to pursue any new recruitments, if that makes sense. It's just regulatory. And then you have to say, yes, I comply. On-site monitoring, staffing ratio, you got to go in here and put what counties you service and how many in each county, and it automatically calculates the exact amount of full-time person you need to have, okay? Then down here, you're going to put in the people who does the monitoring. And it calculates exactly how many hours you have devoted, how many did you need, and if you're in compliance. Section D is about training, pretty simple. We basically tell you what you have to train on. You have to attest that, yes, I am training all my people. Tell us your training policy and when you plan to train for the current fiscal year. Doesn't have to be, super detailed, but you do your trainings every August through September and whatever, or you can even have all your sites come to our trainings if you're a center of sponsors. And then you're actually not supposed to put a name here. You put the can't spell. Just put director. I can't even spell that. So you put the position name, not the person's name. And that's it. Any questions? I know we've got some family daycare homes in here. Let me change my application type one more time. Trying to get to a provider application so we can look at it in case y'all have questions. Nope, it's not changing. Well, I don't want to waste any more time. Does anyone have any questions? Provider applications, we didn't add anything new other than that mealtime change form that everyone else that we've already gone over. Well, I put this training online. Yeah, we'll have a link afterwards that I can send to everyone. YouTube link that we can send out. I don't know if you want to suffer through another 2 hours and 15 minutes of me rambling. The most important thing that most forget to do is to submit it, because we won't even look at your application until you press this button. So please, please, please don't forget. And if you need help, this training is the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of every month.
I have a quick question, and I think you answered it, but I'm going to answer it again. Our phone line is a cell phone. We don't have a hard line. Do we put that under communication, or do we put it? Okay, all right. That's
yeah, used to you still have to submit something, and when you put a cell phone down, we're asked for it, because really we're not supposed to pay for data or this or that, but you can't really get a cell phone now without texting or data. So if you do put a cell phone down, we'll ask for some justification, but I think you're accustomed to doing that anyway. Any other questions? Okay, well, you're welcome. I'm going to put my email address if you do have questions. And then Karen Davis, if you're multi-sided. Jennifer Pryor, she is taking care of our at-risk people. And then Lisa King generally has all the single-sided daycare centers. These are our CACFP people that you need to reach out to with any questions. If you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to let you go. We'll send out the recording to everyone when we get it. Thank you, guys.